Let's get to the reason we're all here tonight. Marty Cagan. So Marty is founder of Silicon Valley Product Group at svpg.com. If you haven't, I'm sure you've read his articles. If you haven't, you should go and subscribe to his blog. He has a lot of great articles in his newsletter, a lot of great product advice. Before that, he was Senior VP of Product and Design at eBay. Before that, he was a VP at Netscape. And before that, he was a developer at HP. His book inspired, I read early in my career, a lot of people have read early in their career. I heard some people talking as they were mingling in, yeah, I read the first version, I haven't read the second one yet. So we've got the second one here, and Marty's going to share some thoughts with us on ordinary people, extraordinary results. So please join me in giving Marty a warm welcome.
Thanks, Dan. All right. This is actually my third January.
Yes.
At this group with this status. Anybody here for all three of those last 3 years? Yeah, cool. Well, Dan, for sure. But I always like this group for sure. And, you guys probably do this too, but every year, New Year's resolution time, maybe, I consider what, we product people, you very much have to pick your battles, right? We all have to. It's one of the things you learn as a new product person. And I do the same thing. I have to pick my battles. There's a lot of things, you see in the industry that just drive me nuts, and you want to go after it and try to, fix it or influence it. But you can't do that with everything. It just dilutes your whole message, right? Same thing you all face at work. And so each year I try to pick a focus of what I think is like the most important thing that's going on. And this talk is about the focus I think is my big focus for, it'll probably take me at least a year. I'm even contemplating another book. It's just a really hard problem. So I thought I'd share with you kind of my thoughts on this topic. Now, if you've ever read my stuff or listened to my talks, this is what I usually talk about, because honestly, this is like my favorite topic. Most product people, the reason we get into product is we like to solve hard problems that are powered by technology. That's kind of the difference between consumer packaged goods and the tech space. So if you give me some great engineers and a great designer, and we go after hard problems. They might be problems for our customers or problems for our business. A lot of times both. But that's what we're paid to do, really, is solve those hard problems. Discovery is just the term. I'm not the only one who uses it. A lot of people use this term. But discovery just means how do we go figure out the solutions to those hard problems? And, it's all about, to me, and the way I like to explain it, is all about risk. There's value risk, usability risk, feasibility risk, business viability risk. It's all about risk. It's all about tackling those risks fast. We could do the old way of just having engineers build something and then find out what works and what doesn't, but that's incredibly slow and wasteful. So we have all these techniques to do that fast. And that, I literally, some of you may have heard, I can literally talk, not an exaggeration, for a full day, about 9 hours, just on good teams, how they do discovery. It really is a great topic, I think, but I've also sort of reluctantly come to realize that I have shown it's not really even that hard to show a team. As long as they have a competent group of people, it's not that hard to show them how to use these techniques to solve hard problems. But I have to admit, in too many companies, not all of them, of course, fortunately, but in too many cases, I find out afterwards that they're not able to use these techniques. And this drives me nuts. You arm a team with all these great tools and then they don't get to use them. And this has bugged me for a long time. I don't want to pretend. I've been aware of this for a long time, but it's one of those things you just don't want to, it's like I don't want to deal with companies like that. But I realized that there's something going on that's really important. And over the last year, I started drilling in when this happened with the CEOs, honestly. Because that's really where you got to go. When this is not happening, that's usually why. So I sit down with the CEOs and I'm like, why are you running the way you're running? In fact, some of them always struck me as amazing. Some of them had come from really good companies that don't work that way. And I'm like, why are you working in the old way? Your team knows better. Why aren't you letting them work? And you know, you argue for a few minutes, but what I usually get to is the real reason, which is what I'm going to get to. So first, let me just frame that there are a couple ways. If you boil it all down, I would argue there's two ways of working in the product world. You know, and I think there's a great way and a bad way, but unfortunately, the bad way is how most companies work. So it's not evenly distributed at all. In most organizations, and this is not the good way, right? In most organizations, the teams exist, and this is literal quote in so many companies. They are literally there and staffed to serve the business. If you've ever heard that term, who's this for? The business, right? And that's what we're doing. That is incredibly common. A lot of times we refer to that as IT mindset, project mindset. It goes by lots of terms, some of which are derogatory. I won't share those, but that's kind of the old way. And then there's this, in great product companies, they work differently. They actually have a very different charter. The purpose of product teams in these companies is actually to serve customers. I mean real customers. The business is not a customer, right? I mean real customers. Serve customers in ways that the customers love, but works for the business. That's a critically important caveat, right? But that works for the business. That's how good companies work. Now, this difference is not a semantic difference, right? This is everything. A lot of people refer to this as culture. In fact, most of those companies, pre-internet companies especially, are working, of course, in that old way, the first way. And they all, what do they have? They have a digital transformation initiative at their company. In fact, since so many of you said you work at companies of 1,000 or more, I bet a lot of your companies have these digital transformation initiatives. And you know, the sad thing is they almost never work. And the reason they don't work is because the companies don't realize what they really need to do is not just staff a digital organization. What they need to do is change from the first to the second. And that is a massive cultural change. But what I was trying to say is, so when we go to companies that now know how to work the way a modern organization works, and they're not allowed to work that way, that's what really gets me. And so when I talk to these CEOs, here's what comes up. Well, first of all, I want to emphasize, I am not the first one to make this argument. This is an old argument. In fact, this is just my 10 favorite books. Literally my top 10 favorite books. I have probably read 20 to 30 on this topic of why empowered teams are so. Powered team is sort of the shorthand for the model I described on the bottom. Teams that are there to serve our customers in ways that work for our business. So these are just my favorite. I'd encourage you to read all of them. All 10 of these are worth reading. If you only read one, I would read the Leaders Eat Last. I would consider that like the best, but they're all good. The thing is, even though all of these books make the case why empowered teams are so much better than the old way, how come so many companies don't do it? Most of them don't do it. And that's what I was getting at with the CEOs. I'm like, why don't you actually empower your teams and let the teams work this way? And the answer is trust. Fundamentally, the CEO or the leaders of the company don't trust the product teams. And just to make this explicit, what that usually means is they don't trust the product managers. Okay. Now, of course, we can get in, I usually do with these CEOs, I get in a whole discussion about why they don't trust them. And of course, I point out to them that who hired these people? I mean, if you've got a bunch of product people that you don't trust, then like whose fault is that? But it's also true that a lot of them will say, look, you know the teams, should I trust these people? And I'm sad to say a lot of times, no, they shouldn't trust those people. If you follow my writing, I believe that the average skill level of a product manager has dropped significantly over the last several years. Now, I think it's a consequence, an unintended consequence of a couple things. The biggest one is the move to Agile. And I want to be clear, I am definitely on the record many, many times as a strong advocate for going to Agile. If you're not, I'll embarrass your company into moving to Agile very easily. You need to. However, when companies moved to Agile, they knew they needed these people called product owners, right? It's a role, right? It's actually a role, product owner. But they thought that, okay, let's send them to a CSPO class to learn how to be a product owner. And they do. They go, if you haven't taken it, you should take it. It's super easy. It's only a few hours. And it teaches you how to basically manage stories in Jira. That is not the product manager job. It's the rituals on an Agile team. It's not the job. It's like 5%, literally. It's about 5% of the job of a product manager. And that's why I call this an unintended consequence. We have a lot of people out there today with the job of a product manager that have the training for the administrative part of the job. And the other thing that's really hurts is another sort of unintended consequence of Agile, which I'm going to talk more extensively about here, is the role of managers. It used to be that the directors of product management knew that their #1 responsibility was to develop great product managers. But Agile kind of convinced them, well, honestly, this is more because of misguided Agile coaches. They tried to convince managers to back off. Stop, stop the whole command and control, back off, let the teams self-organize, let the teams be really empowered, which is a good thing, but not to get the managers to back off. We don't need less management with Agile, we need better management with Agile. So the result, this is my theory as to why I see less, as a general statement, and you all know this, it's much better in the Bay Area than most of the world. But even in the Bay Area, we have a real problem. So it is true that a lot of times the people on the teams are not yet competent to do the job. It's a lot less of an issue with engineers, and it's sort of in between with designers, but with product is sort of the real issue there. So we'll talk more about that and how to fix that, because that's really what I'm trying to tackle, is get these product managers working the way they need to and get teams working the way they need to and getting leaders to work the way they need to, which is really our talk here. Now, you all recognize these 3 companies. I didn't look at the stock market today, but they're generally 3 of the top 4 most valuable companies in the world, right? Well acknowledged. Some of you, like me, have probably actually at least visited, if not worked with, all 3 of these companies. If you have, one of the things you've probably noticed is that all 3 of these companies are consistently pretty awesome at product, but they're all radically different cultures. And really extreme. And I actually put them in this order intentionally because I consider Amazon and Google pretty much polar opposites in terms of culture. Apple is kind of right in the middle there in terms of their culture. But they're 3 very different cultures, yet all 3 consistently produce amazing tech-powered products. And one of the things this sort of realization caused in me was I stopped talking about it as product culture versus the old IT or project culture, because it's not really about, culture doesn't capture it. Otherwise they would all be like more similar. But I think there's some really interesting commonalities between these. I would argue, especially with these 3 companies, the biggest single the biggest single factor about why they're the way they are is actually this guy. Is anybody here working in Intuit? A few of you? You may know, because he used to be a CEO here as part of his career, but he had an amazing career. Bill Campbell, known as the coach of Silicon Valley, I should also say, sadly, he passed away a couple years ago, but he was literally the executive coach for Steve Jobs for 20 years, Larry and Sergey at Google, and then Eric Schmidt and several other Google execs for a decade, the formative decade, and Bezos at Amazon. And, very few people know this, actually. I actually wish, I very much wish I would have been one of those people lucky enough to get coached by him. I wasn't, however. I met him several times, but lucky for me, 2 of my managers in my career were coached by him. So I kind of have always considered myself a beneficiary of his teaching. And in fact, when I left eBay and I started SVPG, one of the first things I wanted to do was write about him. And I wrote an article about the lessons of Bill Campbell, and I asked him to review it. And he said, "Thank you, but please don't publish this." Because and in fact, the reason most of you probably haven't heard of him is because he rejected all press coverage. He wouldn't do interviews. He told me specifically, and that he was famous for this, he didn't want the attention on him. He wanted it on the people out there that he was helping. And I think he was legendary at Intuit. Scott Cook was another one that benefited from Bill Campbell, of course. But what an amazing guy. And I am happy to say Eric Schmidt, who was, most of you know, CEO for a long time at Google, and Jonathan Rosenberg, who was head of product for a long time at Google, those 2 are actually writing a book about Bill Campbell finally. It's scheduled to come out in a couple months, and I pre-ordered it. I hope you guys do too. Anyway, the guy was the real thing. I really mean that. I have a lot of great quotes from him. This is one of my absolute favorites. Leadership is about recognizing there's greatness in everyone, and your job is to create an environment where that greatness can emerge. Now, this is where I'd argue, if you look at Apple and Amazon and Google, they all 3 have very different cultures, but I would argue this is true at all 3. So this is much more meaningful to me than what most of us think of as culture. What are your work hours and what kind of lunches do you have and stuff like that. It's not, this is much more meaningful. And it's interesting because I think one of the biggest confusions in our industry is that, and this is more of a common misconception outside of Silicon Valley, if you go to anywhere else in the world, pretty much they think, all the rock stars, at Google they only hire rock stars, and it's so not true. It is so not true. In fact, there's really good data, even collected and shared by Google, about who really makes up their great teams. And the bottom line is, they're not rock stars. In fact, putting a rock star on a team usually causes more trouble than it fixes. And so we'll talk about what does it even mean by these rock stars are sometimes referred to as 10Xers. But the truth is that consistently best teams are very ordinary people. Very ordinary people, like most, but they're in an environment that they can actually do what they need to do. So that's what I'm really interested in, is more about that, putting this in place. So we'll start with Bill's cue there and start with the role of leadership. I'm going to draw a distinction between leadership and management. You'll see why. Then we'll talk about management, and then we'll talk about the teams themselves. Okay, so some of you may know Mike Fisher, and this is actually Mike Fisher's picture. Marty Abbott, some of you may know also. Mike Fisher was for years the CTO of PayPal. Currently, he's the CTO of Etsy. You guys know Etsy, the marketplace in Brooklyn? It's considered one of the most prestigious spots for a CTO. He's an extremely good CTO. Marty Abbott was the CTO at eBay. That's where I first got to know them, both 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. They are a couple of my absolute favorite leaders. They're like best friends, and they've done a lot of stuff together. But they, I think it's not an accident, actually, their focus on leadership, because a little lesser known, but both Mike and Marty are West Point graduates and former Special Forces, Army Rangers. And, in that world, this whole discussion of leadership is like not an academic thing. It's like life or death. And at West Point, in fact, at Marty Abbott's invitation, I got to visit West Point, which was just like the most amazing place to teach leadership and management I can ever imagine. It's just amazing. But anyway, they take this very seriously. And a lot of the I've learned a lot from those two, and I've tried to share in my writing. But this idea that leadership is about inspiring the team to greater accomplishment, and management is about guiding the teams to the objectives. It really is two distinct responsibilities. Of course, many leaders are also managers, right? Not all managers are leaders. It just depends on the org and where you are in that org. But whether or not it's the same person or not doesn't matter as much as they are very different responsibilities. And so what I want to do, and obviously in a short talk like this, I don't have time to really dive in on what great leadership means and what great management means, but I want to get us all on the same page, or try to get us on the same page about what is your responsibility if you're a leader or a manager. So let's start with the role of leadership. So there's 5 big responsibilities. The first is the product vision, right? If you've got 20 product teams in your organization, or some of you organizations are over 1,000, you've probably got more like 100 product teams in your organization. Getting them all going in the same direction is very hard, right? Much more likely on their own devices, they'll go in 100 different directions, and we see organizations that do that all the time. So the product vision is that North Star, it's the unifier. The product strategy is our plan to make that vision come true. Usually the vision is 5 to 10 years out. And the worst thing you could do, this is another product 101 thing, the worst thing you could do is try to build everything in a first release. So we don't. We have an intentional strategy. That's not a roadmap or anything. This is literally a strategy. It might be a series of product market fits. That's what we usually do, but it's not the only way. The strategy is the responsibility of leadership. It goes with the vision. The product principles talk about the nature of the products we're trying to create. Again, that's part of the holistic view. It's part of, in fact, some people just lump the 3 together into vision, but these are really the 3 important components of product vision. The fourth one, the leaders have to declare some priorities. If they don't, then every team is kind of forced to make assumptions about the priorities. We think this is the most important. Who knows? And in fact, that might sound ludicrous to you, but how many of you have tried OKRs in your company? Yeah, my guess is you've all seen what happens when there isn't understanding of common priorities, because most organizations' first several quarters in OKRs are a fiasco, right? They're all over the place. So we have to decide what's the most important this year, this quarter, and that's also from the leaders. And then the bigger the organization, the more critical the role of evangelism is. Evangelism, of course, is, we don't like to call it this, but it's sales, it's persuasion. The difference is we're not selling to customers, we're selling to our organization. We are trying to convince the organization why our vision is going to be awesome and why you want to spend years of your life committed to this vision. That's evangelism. It is a critical role of leadership. It's the thing, when people point to Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, what they really think of is, boy, can that person sell a vision. It's like, I want to work there. Elon Musk, I want to work there. He's just like, you listen to him for 10 minutes talking about whether it's the future of cars or the future of space travel or whatever, and it's like, I want to work on that. I mean, he's almost a nonstop evangelization machine, but that's a critical responsibility for the leaders. So these are the 5 big things that all the leaders and certainly I'm talking about head of product, but it's usually head of product, head of user experience design, head of engineering. Those are the leaders I'm talking about there. And in most companies, especially startups and growth stage, it would absolutely include the founders and CEO. All right. I also want to make this real for you. I have several examples here of real people. Stacey is a startup CEO, although today you would probably call it growth stage. They have definitely achieved product market fit and they have disrupted their space already. She was, several years ago, she was a practicing vet at a Rocky Mountain vet clinic, and she was very frustrated because the technology that vets have to offer their customers, which are actually not the pets as much as the pet owners, right? The pets are the patients, but the owners are the customers. And she just thought it was terrible. And the use of technology, in medical offices in general, is pretty bad. But she thought it was terrible. I first met her because she wanted some, who should I buy? She wanted some product advice. She just wanted to purchase something. And she couldn't find anything. And she looked actually for a couple of years and couldn't find it. So finally she just came and said, hey, what do you think about the idea of me starting a company? And actually I loved that idea for her because I thought she had first of all, I thought it was wide open opportunity, and I also thought she had the right stuff. So it was pretty amazing watching her. This literally was a startup of one person, but very quickly they had about 5 people, all self-funded. And I watched her first learn the product role. That's basically how I met her and was sort of coaching her on the product role, because the first thing she needed to do was come up with a product. And she was also effectively the head of design. She did have a designer. Eventually she hired pretty quickly, and then a couple engineers. So I watched her learn product. I watched her learn design management and then engineering management. And then I watched her learn marketing, because now she had a product, she had to get the message out. I watched her learn sales. I watched her learn business development, partnerships, and it's just been one of those rocket ships that you talk to. They have disrupted the vet space today. But what I think is really amazing is the reason she did that is she is a great leader in the 5 senses I just described. In 5 minutes, you will get the passion she has for helping pets through pet owners, through this relationship. And the other thing I would say is there is not an arrogant bone in her body. So that is the key, because any great product person, I would argue, especially leaders, you have to know what you can't know. You have to admit what you don't know, right? You have to, and that's what she did. She just I don't know this, but is there any reason I can't learn this? Of course not. She's a fundamentally smart person, but it's more her attitude. That's what I'm looking for in a great leader. So let's talk about the role of management. I like this Steve Jobs quote because I think it's so, people are so confused about what his real legacy was. And this idea that it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do, right? We hire smart people so they can show us what's possible, they can show us what to do. And that really is the MO that's the MO at all the good companies I'm talking about. All right, so there were 5 big responsibilities for leaders. There's 3 big responsibilities for managers. And I would also say this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. You'll see. And just to be clear, I'm not talking product managers, despite the name. Product managers don't manage people, right? In fact, that's important. Product manager is an individual contributor role. Super hard one, very prestigious one, but you're not managing people, you're managing the product. So I'm talking about the managers of product managers, especially, but also managers of design and managers of engineers. All right, 3 big responsibilities. First is staffing. Sounds pretty basic, but if you don't staff your teams with competent people, you fail right at the beginning. And honestly, most people managers I know in these spaces spend way too little time on staffing. One of the biggest mistakes they make is thinking that somehow HR is going to help them with this. And they don't. They can't, honestly. There's administrative parts they can help with, but this is on the managers. If you're a director of product management, this is a big part of your job. In fact, if you're hiring, it usually should be on the order about half your time. So you're sourcing, you're interviewing, you're screening, you're working to close somebody, and you're onboarding. Now, coaching is the biggest responsibility. And this is, if I had to zero in on one thing, one sort of link in the chain that I think is failing today, that's sort of causing all this collateral damage, it's this. Managers are not spending the time coaching that they need to do. I honestly didn't realize the extent of this problem I'm embarrassed to say how it was way longer than it should have taken. And I'm pretty sure I know why, because I was so lucky in that the first 10 years, literal 10 years of my career was at HP. And this was when HP was you know, kind of the Google of the day. They were the most consistently innovative company. They had a major program for engineering management. I got to go through that. It was called the HP Way program. And you know what was amazing was for every day of those 10 years, I had at least one manager that was dedicated to coaching me to become, the general rule is coaching you to competence and then coaching you to the promotion, the next promotion. And I had people constantly helping me move through the, I was in the engineering organizations, but moved through, and then I learned products through that as well. But I thought that was normal. I literally thought that was normal, and then I'd go out into the real world. You know, you leave the HP bubble at the time, and it was HP Labs, which was even more of a bubble. And I found, you know, I'd find people, I still find people where I sit down with the product managers who clearly don't know anything about product, and I'm like who's supposed to be helping you learn this stuff? Nothing, nobody. And of course, it's not like they don't have a manager. Almost everybody has somebody with the title manager, but most of them have never done it themselves. They've often never seen good. They literally, the managers don't even know what good looks like. So, you know, how can you know, it's hard to blame them too much either. But it is on them to make sure the people are competent. So we need, this is a huge hole in most organizations that we need to fill. Many of you know Ben Horowitz, or at least known to the name. He's a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. He actually worked with me at Netscape. We both worked for Mark Andreessen. And he is one of the best product thinkers I've ever met. And Ben likes to argue, in fact, I wish I took it to heart more when I first heard this from him 20 years ago. He likes to argue that the single most important non-C-level position at a company is the director of product management. And his argument is, look, the business is only as successful as the products, right? That's what funds everything. And the product teams are only as successful as the product managers. They're only as good as the product managers. Who do we hold responsible for making sure the product managers know how to do their job? These directors of product management. And it took me a while, but he was dead on right. And this has gotten, like I said, I think this has gotten worse. So coaching is huge. And then the other, this is often where OKRs fall down. Most companies don't have a hard time at the board level, at the business unit level, coming up with objectives for the year. That's not really that hard. It's almost the same thing they come up with in the board of directors meeting. So it's not hard. But then it all falls apart because what happens? So they've got these objectives for the year, and then they tell teams, you know, they tell their 100 teams, go and propose your objectives. And of course, then they get all frustrated because they're literally all over the place. And of course, that's not how it works. That's not how it's even supposed to work. The managers are missing in action in that model. The actual managers are supposed to be translating the business objectives for the year into relevant objectives for each and every product team. And of course, I don't have time to really dive into OKRs, but the idea is the managers give objectives to the teams, and the teams come back with proposed key results. And then there's a big negotiation, give and take. Of course, we love it when teams suggest objectives and we try to accommodate them, but the chances for 50 teams, honestly, this would be true even with 10 teams. The chances that 10 teams actually propose objectives that achieve the business level at the end of the year is pretty much zero, right? So in a nutshell, that's why OKRs are such a mess at so many companies. It's because these managers are not doing their job. All right. Here's one of my favorite examples of a head of product. To be honest, today is one of my favorite examples on both leader head of product and manager head of product. But I first met him as a director of product management, and I met him because he was working as a director at one of the companies I advised called Snag-a-Job. They were in Richmond, Virginia. They did jobs marketplace for hourly workers. And anyway, I was so surprised visiting this company. The founder was introduced to me, and I was so surprised to see these great product people. And they told me about Christian, who had basically hand-pick these people and then train them to be great product people. And I've now watched him go through 3 companies and completely up-level the product organizations. And then of course, Once you've done that, the business success has followed. In fact, his current company is Merrill Corporation, which is the financial services company. And I was very surprised when he took that job a few years ago, because like this is one of those old financial services companies that was clearly on the road to obscurity, right? They were in trouble. Very old school everything, all the wrong culture we talk about. And he and a couple friends actually that they worked with, but Christian in charge of product, it's just been an amazing turnaround. It is one of those true transformations today. The point is though, this guy, in fact, just a few weeks ago, he was doing every few months he does a boot camp, a couple-week boot camp for his new product people, where he personally coaches them through how to become a competent product person. How many directors of product or VPs of product are doing that today? That used to be normal, but he's doing that. That's what we want. I've always been, he's so good at it and so good at developing people. I was always curious about his personal circumstances, and he's actually Nigerian, and he told me that he thinks sort of his interest in helping people and developing people came. He actually went to school in a UN-funded school in Nigeria where they had students from all across Africa. He said the hardest part was they spoke 80 different languages, almost no overlap. And so the first thing he had to do is learn how to work with everybody, anybody. So anyway, a terrific leader and manager. All right, so let's talk about that fundamental issue of trust. I talked about the responsibilities of leaders and managers, but this is where we need to make sure this happens. Now, many of you know Stephen Covey. He's, of course, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He also passed away a few years ago, but I've always loved his definition of the ingredients for trust. There's probably 1,000 definitions out there, but to me, this one has always resonated. And that is that trust depends on 2 things, competence and character. Now, I'll talk about character next. That's hugely important also, but the table stakes for the members of a product team really is competence. I mean, obviously, in engineers that don't know how to program, that's not helpful. And that's not common, right? Most of the time, we know how to interview for competence for the engineering role. It's harder actually to interview for competence on the designer roles, unless you have an experienced head of design that can do that. But you know, a lot of smaller companies, they don't have a manager of design. So they ask somebody to recruit a designer, and they often get into trouble that way because they don't know what to look for. But this is really a common problem with the product managers, like I said, because if the director of product management was never, well, it's not like they've never done product. Most of them have, but the problem is they've done it at a place that doesn't know how to do it well. And so they've never seen good before. So this is where we get this propagation issue. And you know, when you've got somebody that really doesn't know what good looks like, then there's a couple common behaviors. One of them is they think they have to hire somebody from Google. It's like, that's pretty much, we're going to get somebody from Google. And then, of course, they realize it's hard to recruit somebody out of Google to join this person who doesn't even know what they're doing, right? So they often struggle. And, you know, they set this bar for themselves that in their mind is so high that what they often do, I'm going to bleed into the character issue here, they often do is they find somebody that they think is great, and even though they have these personality, you know, quirks, we'll say, then they're like, yeah, but such great experience, which ends up causing even more problems than before. So we have this issue. That's absolutely critical that we staff our teams with competent people. Now, it's actually okay, in fact, I pride myself on this, I think it's a good thing to do, to hire on potential. But if you hire, I'm really speaking to the managers of product managers here, if you hire on potential, you have to commit to coaching that person to competence. And if you fail, finding a different job for that person. And that's a big bar. I mean, the normal coaching is hard, just anybody. But if you're now hiring somebody based on potential, they've never done it before, but you think they have the right stuff, that's a lot of work you're signing up for. So by all means do it if you're willing, but you've got to have the knowledge and the time to actually do that. All right, so competence is critical. Let's talk about character though. You guys might know the New Zealand All Blacks. Well, most of you probably wouldn't. They are a New Zealand rugby team. And what is interesting about the All Blacks is across all sports, so baseball, soccer, football, doesn't matter, across all sports, across the last 100 years, across the entire globe, this is the single most successful sports franchise. Isn't that amazing? Over 100 years. Amazing win percentage. And they have built such a strong culture. One of the things they found, they're sort of famous for doing the haka, if you YouTube it, it's fun. But they have found that no matter how talented, skilled, strong, I mean these guys are trucks, right? No matter how skilled they are, if they're assholes, they're not worth bringing onto the team. In fact, they have this idea of the no asshole rule. And by the way, they not only use that to screen out people, but including coaches. They have fired coaches for this. And you know, not enough people talk about this. And this is one of, I think, the root issues. What I find going on in too many companies is they don't actually have an HR policy that says, look, no assholes. They should. By the way, at Stanford's business school, there's a professor, Bob Sutton, that wrote a book called The No Asshole Rule. That literally calls this out and talks about how to interview to make sure you're not getting this person. And if you do make the mistake, which we all occasionally do, how to remove those people. But what we really need, if you look at most companies, they don't have this in their HR guidelines, but they do have something else. They have something that says, sometimes in writing, make sure we interview for cultural fit. You guys seen that? Cultural fit. And they do this because they're trying to kind of get into this, but what does that even mean, cultural fit? For most interview teams, it's so amorphous. They really have no idea what this means. And my theory is, from talking to too many of these people, especially when they don't hire somebody I think is excellent for them, what's really going on, my theory, is to them they're like, well, nobody can define cultural fit in any useful way. So look, by definition, I was hired, so I must be cultural fit, right? So what does that mean? Hire people that look like me, sound like me. I mean, literally, they often do, right? They're white guys that have gone to the same universities, studied the same majors. And one of the things that really gets me is in the interviews, this is incredibly common today in interview practices, they will actually see if the candidate solves problems the way they do. Literally thinks about solving problems the way they do. And I'm like, what are you doing? That's the opposite of what we want to do. We want people on the team that think differently. Otherwise, why get them, right? I mean, we want 10 different ways of approaching the problem. Of course, to me, it's pretty obvious why we have such bad diversity in tech. But it's, to me, even beyond the diversity issues, the sort of ethical issues, even beyond that, we're hurting ourselves because we are not getting the different viewpoints we need, and we're ending up accepting people that are assholes because they're, quote, cultural fit. So, no, I think this is a really deep issue in so many companies, and I'd love to see the interviewing change. And some companies have figured this out. I mean, I mentioned Google a few times. Google has been studying the dynamics of successful teams probably longer than anybody that I know. And they shared, a couple of years ago, they shared a lot of their findings under something called Project Aristotle, which you can Google that term and you can, some great results, where they basically said, look, the great teams are not the rock stars. In fact, you'd think taking a bunch of all-stars, putting them together is going to like solve the world's problems. Not even. Not even. Consistently the best teams are people where they're competent, but they trust each other. They don't use the words no asshole in the report, but they do use the word, they say psychological safety is the term they use. This is what we're talking about though. You know, because this is the thing, this is why people don't realize the true cost of hiring assholes, or even worse, keeping them in the organization. It's because they destroy trust. They break that. So, and I'll tell you, this is true with me. Everybody I know who's actually managed people for a long time, if you ask them what are their biggest regrets, biggest lessons learned, it's like, oh man, I should have got rid of that person a long, long time ago. Because once I finally did, you know, the world was so much better than we thought it would be. And, you know, they're scared too because they feel like this person has this special skill that we're going to lose. But it's just consistently, though, once those people the toxicity is out, then everybody else really starts shining and they want to work there and their motivation goes up and they solve hard problems together. So this is not a small point. All right, so competence and character. That's what we're looking for. Here's a few examples, product design and engineering. Audrey is a product manager at Augury. Augury is an Israeli startup. I'll have to say I have spoken to groups all, you know, not everywhere in the world, but a lot of places in the world. And the most impressive teams to me are consistently Israeli teams. And I always sort of wondered why, because they're not a big country, and most of the people are not actually Israeli. They've come from all over the place. But the one thing about Israel that's different than I think anywhere else in the world I know is at 18, males and females, they all go serve in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, generally for 3 to 4 years. And you know, that is actually where most of their tech people learn. Learn developing, designing. That's where they learn it, not in university. That's a whole other discussion. But anyway, Audrey, the way it works in Israel is they test you in high school, and the Army knows where they're going to put you when you turn 18. For whatever reason, they looked at Audrey and said fighter pilot, and they sent her to flight training to be a fighter pilot. It took about a year before she was a certified fighter pilot, and then because she also had learned to program before, they put her on simulation software, working on simulations for emergency maneuvers. Okay, and part of that, working on this simulation for the flight simulators, is training the pilots that come in generally a couple times a year for a couple days to get advanced training. And her commanding officer told her, look, this is a hard job, but here's what your orders are. You have to find a way to get these pilots to actually listen to you. And these are fighter pilots. These are, you know, on the arrogant side of the spectrum, right? So fighter pilots, they have to listen to you. And it's because it can save their lives, for real. This is, you know, life or death again situation. And then the commanding officer said, you know, and the truth is they're not going to listen to you unless they trust you. Which means they have to, two things. They have to believe you know what you're talking about. That's why you're a pilot also, that you have to know what you're talking about. And they also have to like you enough to give you that chance. And that was her mantra, like me, trust me, listen to me. And I thought when she told me that, I was, you know, this is pretty much what product people have to do all the time with executives around the company, partners, customers. But that's what we're looking for. Audrey, some of you may, Audrey's a partner at Design Map in San Francisco. I actually first met Audrey. She worked for me at Netscape, just a fantastic designer. Had been taught design by Hugh Dubberly, who's one of Silicon Valley's most famous design leaders, and formerly of Apple and Dubberly Design. But anyway, Audrey is one, I mean, this is what I mean by designer too. I'm not talking about a visual designer. I mean somebody, a true designer in the sort of Steve Jobs sense of the word. Designers are there to solve hard problems with real constraints. Design is how it all works, not just the look and feel, right? And that's what great designers do. And this is what I've seen Audrey, I mean, I have known her well for about 25 years now. And I have seen her, I don't know how many different products where she tackles. And it just doesn't matter how hard it is, she always finds a way. In fact, it's like the harder it is, the more into it she is. And that really is a mindset. This is what we're looking for in a strong designer. And you know, the truth is competent, and these are all people you'd love to work with. They're not extraordinary, and they're not like, none of them are MIT grads or anything like that. They're just normal people that are doing their job well. Okay, Lindsey is an engineer. Lindsey is, I like to highlight Lindsey because in an empowered product team, we need engineers that are fearless. What I mean by that is that are not afraid to go toe-to-toe with the product manager and the CEO. This is what we need, right? In a good product team, the engineers don't just build what the product manager puts on a backlog, roll over and say, whatever. They don't do that. They're like, show me why. That's what we need in engineers. That's why I like Lindsey. She was, I mean, she had a childhood where she was bullied a lot, and luckily she learned to program and liked to program. She studied computer science and, interestingly, drama in college. And then, and she's actually now, not only is she an accomplished engineer, but she's one of the top-rated experts on Stack Overflow. She specializes in iOS native app development. But yeah, that's what we're looking for. These are the people I see on the great teams. They're just ordinary people that when you put them together to solve hard problems, they do pretty amazing things. All right, so let's talk about, there is a litmus team for whether or not your organization is working like I'm describing. Simple litmus test. I'd love it if you all told me you're already working this way, but I'd be really surprised. This is the true test of empowered teams. 3 things. The first is that your team is actually staffed with competent people that cover the range of skills you need. Normally that's product design engineering. You might need a data analyst. You might need product marketing, depending on what you're doing, but you're staffed with the competencies you need. Otherwise, of course, you're a team that's set up to fail. So that's our prerequisite. The real litmus test is this second one. Because if you have a team like that and then the managers get together every quarter and come up with a roadmap and just throw the roadmap over to you and say, build these features this quarter, that is not why we hire these teams, right? That's the mercenary model, not the missionary model. So what we want to do is we want to make sure the team is actually solved rather than features to build. They're actually assigned problems to solve. Remember, customer or business problems to solve, and the team is able to decide the best way to solve those problems. And that's really for 2 big reasons. One is they'll own it, right? They'll take responsibility for it and own it, and also they're usually in the best position to figure out the right way to solve it anyway. And then finally, in this model, you know, teams don't get brownie points for shipping features. They don't. They only do get credit if they solve the problem that they were asked to solve. So if the reason we're working on this is because our retention is terrible, then unless we improve retention, we really haven't done anything except shipped a bunch more features. So it's all about outcome, results. Though if that is the context for your product teams, awesome. And I would argue this is the context for the product teams in the organizations I've been referencing. The company that's the most of a mystery to most people is actually Apple, because they're the most secretive company probably in our industry by a long shot. And they rarely share anything. But somehow there is like the first book that actually provides an insider account of how product discovery is done at Apple, came out recently. It's called Creative Selection, right? Creative Selection. I'm trying to remember the guy's name that wrote it. I told you. No. That's not.
It's something like, yeah, I read it because you were doing it. It's good.
Maybe it is. That name is not ringing a bell, but sorry. But anyway, yeah, Creative Selection.
Yeah. And
anyway, he was the tech lead for what I would consider, look, the reason Apple is...
Ken Kocienda.
Ken Kocienda, that's what I mean. Thank you. Look, the reason Apple's worth nearly $1 trillion is the iPhone, right? No secret. It's the iPhone. The reason the iPhones became a thing is because they had a huge risk right at the beginning. Now, most of you, the iPhone's 12 years old now, right? 12 years? And it was a 3.5-year effort for the first iPhone. Put yourself back then. This was the first pure touchscreen device. And even Apple, did not have a way to let us enter text. It's pretty hard to do a device like that if you can't enter anything, the text, because everybody else had keyboards before that for this. And this was their biggest risk. It was a value risk, and it was a usability risk, and a huge feasibility risk. So it was really, the whole business was predicated on this. And they had a lot of prototyping. In fact, this is the book describes basically this engineering lead's journey from a novice developer to really what we would call a tech lead or even a principal engineer. And he learned about the different kinds of prototypes and all that. But he came up with the prototype that actually was the one that management realized that can work eventually. And so they ended up making him the tech lead for the keyboard, which I would argue was the single most important pillar to the success of the iPhone and really changed the industry. And anyway, over like 300 pages, he describes how that worked and the process. And it's really worth reading if you want to get a better insight to how they work. But when I was reading that book, I was like, because I had never met anybody working on the keyboard part of the iPhone. This was fascinating to me. And I'm looking, do they do the things that I consider good product teams do? These three, yes. I'm also looking at, the big three tests for me are always, do they tackle the risks up front? That's what it's all about there. Do they solve problems collaboratively? Product design engineering, absolutely. In fact, the book talks a lot about the engineering design collaboration in detail. And then the third one is, what's the measure of success? Shipping features or solving problems? And it was solving problems. So to me, it showed me that team was doing what we need to do. All right, so that's what we're looking for. When did I start, Dan? 6:30? Oh, that's about an hour. All right. Yeah, I threw a ton at you. I know that. You can see I'm sort of working on a lot of these problems at once. I did commit to myself and also publicly that I'm going to be writing a lot more about these things, these topics. I have been, and I'm still working on several. I've got lots more to go. But to me, we need to get a lot more companies really doing truly empowered teams. So I'll tell you what, we have time for some questions.
Yeah, so we have a question. Thanks a lot. Let's give Marty a big hand for that. So that we capture the questions, you have to have a mic. So if you don't have a mic, don't ask a question. Raise your hand. One of our mic runners will give you a mic. All right?
Thank you, Marty. Awesome talk. And after a long time, I'm here. So the question I have is, when you look at Tesla today, they're still focused on their product, but is there like an element of this whole quarter-on-quarter thinking that causes a company to go sideways?
Is there an element of what? Sorry?
Quarter-on-quarter thinking because of the shareholders and the stocks in the market.
Well, I'd never met anybody that didn't think so. Of course, it's a big factor. One of the challenges for Tesla, car company, we talk about software company, like a SaaS software company is like the easiest thing to capitalize and just fund. That's like the hardest, right? It's billions and billions of dollars. So they had to be much more public than they would, most companies would want to be. So, a lot of companies share their product vision. They did. They also shared their product strategy, because that was the key for them to get funding. And they largely delivered on that strategy. People give them a hard time because they were months to years late on some of the milestones in that, like when the Model S finally came out, when the Model 3 was shipping in production. But to me, it is amazing what they did. To me, Elon Musk clearly needs a vacation, as far as I'm concerned. But he is the greatest living product person in my book. Yeah. Yeah, there's a question. Do you have a mic? Does anybody have a mic that wants a question?
Hi. So you mentioned that a lot of companies are not working this way. I also read your book. I think you go into quite a lot of details there. But what I'm also curious is, have you met companies actually who managed to make the transformation and the change? And what was really the common driving force that actually helped them to make that change?
Oh yeah. So is it possible to do this kind of transformation? So it's a definitive yes. There's several companies that have made this transformation. I actually mentioned one of the most amazing examples to me because I thought they were starting from the furthest behind, which was that Merrill Corporation in the old financial services world. They do software for mergers and acquisitions, so pretty hardcore financial services company. But several others. But to your question about why, so I have come to believe that it won't happen unless it's led from the top. It really has to come from the top. And so I've kind of, got to the point where unless it's the CEO that's calling, I'm like, look, just save yourself a lot of time and money. But a lot of times the CEO gets religion somehow. Sometimes it's because they're watching their competitors drop to Amazon, right? Sometimes it's because their board of directors threatens their job. Sometimes they are newly hired because the board of directors kicked out the old one. But for whatever reason, sometimes that happens where they get to the point where they know this needs to change. But it is hard. It starts at the top, but you have to realize where culture really lives. It might start at the top, but it lives in the managers. It's the 1,000 managers that were hired by the former leaders. It's like Uber is genuinely, I believe, trying to change their ways, but there's 1,000 managers that were hired by Travis. And that does not turn around overnight. So it's hard. Yeah, so I don't want to make it sound easy. How do you want to do this? Do you guys... Because I see hands, but I don't...
Real quick, just raise your hand if you know you want to ask a question in the future. Raise your hand.
There's one in the back. Good.
Do a backlog, a microphone backlog.
Hi. So you mentioned earlier in the talk about coaching and how poorly we do coaching now. I think it's a fascinating concept because as a manager, we're often told not to coach people, younger people. I'm actually a lot older than I look, but I often run into the situation where you're not supposed to coach them because no one wants to be told how to do their job. These are smart people, competent, trustworthy people who are more than capable of Googling and finding exactly what to do, right? So I'm curious to just hear.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah. Coaching.
No, but I think coaching is developing someone. Now, the truth is, the alternative to coaching to competence is command and control management. That's not what we want. And the irony is, it's actually easier for the manager to just tell you what to do. We do not want that. What we want is someone who will every single week, at least once a week, sit down with you, and it's often referred to as radical candor, or Ray Dalio refers to it as tough love, but it's like, if you work for me, and we have built the relationship to the point where you trust me that I have only one goal, which is to help you become awesome. This is what I try to do for all the people that have either worked for me or I advise now, that I have no interest in taking your job or politics or crap like that. I just want to make you awesome. If you get to the point where you believe that, then every week we can sit down and have a really constructive discussion. I mean, say, hey, remember that meeting yesterday with the VP of Finance and how you were getting clearly angry at whatever was going on? Let's talk about how you could have done that way better. That's the discussion we all need. And that's coaching. I'm not going to tell you what to do. In fact, I make a point. Product manager is not a job for junior people. I wish we didn't have that associate PM role. To me, that causes way more damage than help. Nobody wants, look, in every product team, there's only one product manager, so nobody wants a junior person as their product manager. They want a competent product manager. So to me, it's a high bar. So, and of course, I love hiring for potential, but then you are actively coaching, sometimes daily, to get that person to where they need to be. But it is not about telling them how to do their job. It's about giving them the tools, the skills to be able to do their job. So coaching is a very different thing. Believe me, Bill Campbell was not lecturing Steve Jobs about what the iPhone needed to be. Yeah. He was telling him how to set up an organization so that people could do amazing things. That's very different. There's one. Yeah, hi.
Hi, Marty. Thank you so much for your inspirational talk. Having been in a situation where I was a junior product manager on the team and trying to influence the product bottom up may not always be optimal. Thank God I'm in an organization now which doesn't function that way.
Good.
But if you're looking on the outside and you're on the lookout for like roles in the industry, how would you determine from the outside whether a particular startup or an organization you're considering functions the way, like you said, with empowered teams versus not?
No, it's a great question. Because if you do, at some point in your career, go to another company, you want to try to, I would strongly encourage you to go. And also go a little further. If you're a new product manager, the most important thing, that's probably the most common question I get, where should my first job be as a product manager? And I'm like, don't worry about the company. It doesn't really matter if it's B2B or consumer device. Go work for somebody who has been there, done that, and is committed to helping you learn this job. It's usually a 1 to 2 year thing. So that's what we're looking for. So whether you're a new product manager or further along, you want to make sure you're going, hopefully, to one of these companies where you can really do your thing. Now, it turns out it's not that hard to tell. First of all, you'll talk to other people in the organization. The little secret is talk to an engineer. Engineers are terrible at hiding this. They're just terrible. And just ask them, where these ideas come from. What are you working on right now? Who thought of that? And you could, if it's a team in Amazon, it's like, well, we thought of that, of course. That's what our job is. If it's, I won't drop names, but I could, of course. But if it's one of those other kind of companies, it's like, oh, well, came on the roadmap. They do it every quarter. It's not hard. You can talk to really anybody on a team and figure that out. You can ask them about their process. How do things work here? That's a totally fair question. Personally, I would not hire somebody that didn't even know enough to ask that question. That's pretty important. How do things work? What is it that we're doing? It's not enough just say, oh, we're agile. What does that even mean, right? Yeah.
Thank you, Marty, for the awesome talk.
Sure.
I'm actually an MBA student, so people who are recruiting, let's talk afterwards. My question is, you talked a lot about character. So how do you go about judging a person for their character, especially during the interview process where you only have limited time?
I know.
So
this is, yeah. So, here's the thing. I did say and tried to be very emphatic about it. Don't hire assholes, right? But most assholes are smart enough to get through an interview. Really. How hard is it to behave for a day or two? It's not that hard. If they can't behave even for that, that's not, if you make that hard. But honestly, I have made that mistake before. Most people that have been on interview teams hiring, they have made that mistake before. So then it's not about, because we know occasionally that mistake will be made. It's really about what are you going to do when you figure that out? What are you going to do? And I have really, over the years, got a lot more. If you would have had this discussion with me 10 years ago, you would have heard me argue for coaching that person, try to help them, change their ways. Today, it's like, no. If they're an asshole, they're toxic. Now, don't get me wrong, that's different than somebody being really excited, right? Some people get very, again, I could talk about developers. Often they wear their emotions on their shirt sleeve. They don't really have that filter, and so that's okay. If I get somebody that is like very excited and just trying to learn, that's different. Enthusiasm or being very passionate about the topic, that's not an asshole. But if you determine that somebody is that way, and honestly, if a 360, it finds that, you will know these people. The only question is, what do you do about it? And I'm like, yeah, they should be in some other kind of organization, because products are never the result of one person. They're always the result of a team. It's just the nature of product. So we care so much and have to care so much about the chemistry of the team and trust. Yeah, hi.
Great talk, thanks.
Sure.
So I love the idea of coaching. I'm a big fan of it, have some mentors. In fact, I found out about this because one of my current product mentors said, hey, read Marty's book and Dan's book, and so I read both. That's how I found out about Meetup. And so I'm not a trained product person, and I, shameless self-promotion, we're looking for some awesome product people. So I kind of asked Dan to say that. So, but what I struggle with is, as the CEO of the company, I want to implement that as part of our culture, but I don't know that what I hear from you is that I do a good job of making sure that everybody is getting coaching. So what do you see in companies that have a great culture that the CEO is helping to get everybody in the company like that mentality and getting coaching and helping? Would be,
Yeah, perfect. And of course, that's what you want to hear, is that's what you want. A lot of, as a CEO, I'd have to talk to you to find out, are you also the real head of product, or are you looking for a head of product to complement you? Kind of the answer, depending on what you tell me. And I know great companies in either boat. It's not, either can work well. The thing is, you have to make sure these things are covered one way or another. And so we'll look at your strengths and we'll fill that, whatever the weaknesses are, with that other person. The short answer for a lot of companies is make sure that if you have multiple product managers, that you have a director of product management that is going to own making sure they're doing what they need to do. It really is the key lever. Yeah?
So, thanks for the talk,
Sure.
as well. Similar question, but I'm one of those directors you talk about. So I've gotten into product accidentally in a way. I now manage multiple product teams with group managers. I'm nowhere near competent on product as the people you showed. But there's no senior product person above me in the company.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Right. Well, no, that's not that unusual, right? Because I would argue, first of all, get your priorities straight. Your number one priority is to raise your game. Or honestly, you have to hire somebody that is going to do that. There is that model too. But assuming it's raise your game, you're going to want, and since it's not somebody in your company, sometimes though one of your board of directors, one of your investors is an experienced product person. A lot of them are. Like Ben Horowitz is an awesome product person. Anybody lucky enough to have him on their board gets his kind of coaching. But there are lots of others as well, so you could look there too. But otherwise, you're going to have to look for some other place. An advisor, for example, there are lots. Dan will talk to Dan. He could help you with that. I mean, I'm not trying to get a commission or anything, but yes, yeah. So, but one way or another, you got to do that. Yes.
Hey, Marty,
Hi.
Thanks for the talk. On this theme of coaching, wanted to ask, so for radical honesty, you were saying it was kind of the mentor being radically honest with the mentee. Does it go in the reverse order as well? Or how should that work?
It absolutely should if you're going to have that relationship, but it's not really about that. So I don't want you to focus on that. This is not like you get to unload on your boss. If we have the right kind of relationship, you should be able to tell me, look, I felt totally unprepared for that meeting. Couldn't you have shared some of those dynamics? And I would say, I screwed up. I didn't even think about that. So yeah. But for the most part, it's like, I need to help you get the experience you need to succeed. Yeah. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So thanks for the talk. And my question is also about trust. So you mentioned that trust and character are basically character is an important factor of trust. But I just wanted to ask, how about the character of the CEO? If the CEO is not a trusting person, and not just not just trusting towards product team, but towards everybody else doing their job. So
yeah.
What's the solution?
No, I mean, this is why I say a lot of the culture does start at the top. The culture does start at the top. So, our industry kind of likes to pick on Travis from because it was so blatant, you know, so it was so blatant. And yeah, there's people like that. And, you know, to me, it's not the kind of place I'd want to work. Now, that's not usually a secret. Even at a big company, the character of the CEO is not usually a secret. So you have to be okay with that. Bezos has an interesting, like he is not known as a jerk or anything like that, but he is incredibly demanding. And one of the things I learned a long time ago was never send anybody as a referral over to Amazon unless they're willing to like 7x24 work like crazy. Just one of those things you learn. That's their place. That's his DNA. He's all in and he wants everybody else to be all in. And the people that I've sent that didn't really understand that are no longer working there. So it's one of those things. This stuff is not necessarily a secret.
Glassdoor is like a lot of people.
Glassdoor. Yeah, these are pretty well known. If it's an unknown, you know, 4-person startup, you'll have to do some work. This is another thing you can do. I'm a big fan if you are looking at a job and you've got a potential new hiring manager, go to LinkedIn and look at the places that person worked. If they were like a director of product at Netflix, it's like, go work for that person. They're going to help you become great. If they were at one of these really good companies, that's going to be a great sign. Yeah.
Hey, Marty, I have a question.
Sure.
By the way, thanks for the talks.
Yeah.
I saw you last year and obviously tonight, so it's great to catch you again. And thanks for all your writing.
Thanks.
So something I want to talk about is that my company is going through defining OKRs for the very first time.
Okay.
And I've heard nightmare stories.
Yeah.
And I want to try to make us as successful as possible.
Yes.
So what tips do you have for us to pull this off?
Well, I put them in the book. So read the book. I got so frustrated with people, because I didn't really want to write a book about OKRs, and other people have, but there were so many common problems. I just put several chapters into it. It's actually a non-issue. It's easy if you're a true early startup, but as you get bigger, it becomes a lot harder, and so I shared. And a guy named Felipe Castro is writing a book. I have reviewed like 2 iterations of it already, and I'm hoping that will be a good book. John Doerr, of Kleiner Perkins, and before that at Intel, he wrote a book on OKRs called Measure What Matters, which is the best one, I think, so far. But it didn't talk about a lot of the hard problems. It just sort of made the case about why it's good, right? But we had that. Anyway, it's still a good contribution. We need more of a how-to for teams. So.
Sure. Okay, well, thanks for that. And I know that Radical Focus is actually a pretty good book.
Yes, it is. Christina's book. Yep. Yeah.
Hi, Marty.
Hi.
It's very loud. Thanks for the talk. Really appreciated hearing some of your thoughts. My question is actually more along the lines of making better decisions. I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on this, that I believe, like probably most other product managers, that data informs better decisions, right? I'd love to know your view on the balance of going and gathering more and more data versus just going ahead with what you know currently and kind of learning that in the market. Especially when you're dealing with more risk-adverse style companies. Yeah, this is actually a big topic, right? Because now this is really getting into the heart of the discovery topic. Because now what we're really talking about is judging the severity of risk. A lot of times with risk, we talk about consequence. Like with, for example, if it's a device you're working on, a Fitbit, an iPhone, the consequence of screwing up is horrible. Like career-ending kind of thing. On the other hand, if it's consumer service, then the consequence of screwing up may be a day. No big deal. So you have to kind of balance consequence with the difficulty, and then we have quantitative and qualitative techniques for trying things out. So the job of a product manager is pick the right tool for the job. We have many, many tools, and not really trying to plug the book, but the book does talk about the main tools and techniques for exactly answering that question. It's important that you realize there is no one answer to that, right? It depends on all of these things. That's why you need on the order of 50 different techniques to have all the tools. Like we have 4 kinds of prototypes that every good team I know needs to use. If you read that book on the Apple iPhone, they used all of them. So they needed them. That was a super hard thing to do. Tell you what, one more.
Yeah.
One more.
Well, we can wrap it up. We're past 8, so why don't we? I know everyone would stay here in their seat all night. So, but let's give Marty a big hand. He'll stick around and answer questions.